This story will definitely surprise you. I'm waiting for your comments and likes. Sarah Cooper wiped the sweat from her brow as she stepped out of the hot truck cab. The Arizona July sun was merciless, and the air felt dry and still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The skin on her cheeks was flushed with the heat, her dark blonde hair was plastered to her temples, and the old elastic band she was holding was hopelessly losing its grip. Sarah was a slender woman in her 30s, with intense brown eyes that often reflected weariness but also undying tenacity. She had years of accounting in a thankless corporate environment and endless attempts to maintain the warmth of a marriage that sometimes felt more like a partnership than love. Thousands of miles were behind her, from snowy, ever-hurrying Chicago to this sun-scorched, alien but alluring land. She and John had been married for 9 years. Once, he had seemed like a hero from an old movie, tall, reliable, with dark eyes and a smile that could melt ice. Lately, the smile has appeared less and less often. John Cooper was a mechanic in the past. Now he was the head of the fleet of a large construction company. Reliable, silent, with hands that seemed to be molded from rough leather and steel. The move to Arizona and the new position became a way for him to prove that he could still give his wife stability and confidence in the future. They still clung to each other, though not as tightly as before. They didn't have children, either because they were constantly busy with work or because they kept putting everything off for later, afraid that later would not be now. And yet, in the deserted Arizona land, among foreign smells and foreign lights, Sarah felt they had a chance. A new life, new walls, perhaps a new closeness. John's new position promised them a calmer and more secure life. And Sarah hoped that now that the dust had settled, they could finally return to what they had long dreamed of, to a child, to a home where laughter could be heard, and not only the rustle of pages and the sound of the refrigerator. She turned around to see John standing by the trunk, squinting into the sun, and noticing her gaze, he raised his hand in greeting. Sarah smiled back, tiredly but hopefully. It was only just beginning. Before Sarah's eyes stretched a street of neat, southwestern houses, flat roofs, pale pink stucco walls, surrounded by parched grass and the occasional palm tree. Only cacti and hardy shrubs survived the scorching sun. In the distance, blue mountains loomed, reminding Sarah of the set of a Western movie. Their new house was at the very end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a white one-story cottage with clay tiles on the roof. The neighborhood seemed calm and welcoming. Among the neat but almost identical houses, a small park stood out with an artificial lake and a tall fountain in the center, the calling card of this area. The stream of water, sparkling in the rays of the sun, rose upward, as if trying to reach the pale sky. It smelled of dust, freshly mown grass, and something else, something new, unknown, but not unpleasant. Sarah squinted against the bright light and looked around the street. The neighboring yard was decorated with plastic flamingos, and a cat sat lazily on one of the lawns, completely oblivious to the bustle of the move. She was somewhat reassured by the fact that everything looked peaceful here. No sirens, no loud voices, no constant hum of transport. Just the wind rustling through the palm trees and the occasional echo of life outside the open windows. "Our home," she said quietly to herself, tasting the words. She still couldn't believe that this piece of land with a terracotta roofed house was now theirs. She felt a little uneasy. Everything around her seemed new and foreign, like someone else's clothes, not yet lived in. There was so much uncertainty ahead, and in her soul there was still an anxious, what if? But she tried to push these thoughts away. It was for the sake of a fresh start that she and John had decided to make this move. For the sake of what Chicago had lacked. A car door slammed. John Cooper, her husband, appeared around the corner of the house, a cardboard box slung over his shoulder. His faded t-shirt was stuck to his back. His forehead was shiny with sweat, but he still smiled when he saw his wife. "Well, Mrs. Cooper, welcome home," he said cheerfully, although his voice betrayed his tiredness. Sarah smiled back and came closer. "Is it heavy?" She touched the box with her palm. "Unless there are gold bars inside, I'm disappointed," John said, feigning tension as he lowered the box onto the porch. Although, to be honest, if it's your favorite china, it might be heavier than the gold. Put it down and I'll take care of it, Sarah said, squatting down. You're all sweaty already. Go get a drink of water, or you'll fall over right here. I hope it wasn't the dishes, he muttered, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. You packed them like you were transporting museum exhibits. Because this is my museum, especially that tea set from my grandmother, which you once called a scary plate with a face. John snorted as he remembered. I'm still sure he was mad at me. That plate had a crooked eye. Sarah laughed, easily, without effort, for the first time that day. It was the right moment. A simple, short joke, but it seemed to loosen a tight string inside her. Okay, Joker, go to the kitchen, find a bottle of water. It's somewhere in a bag with the sign, "Don't lose," she said ironically. Sounds like never to be found again, John said, heading inside, holding his shoulder, which was aching from the weight. Sarah watched him go. The house still smelled of paint and dust and wood. Empty, alien, but still theirs. She sighed, stood up, stretched, and kicked off her sandals, stepping barefoot onto the hot wooden boards of the porch. It was hot, but pleasant. To the right, at the neighboring house, a door slammed and a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair appeared, holding a tray of lemonade. Newcomers, she called out kindly, waving her hand. Sarah nodded in surprise. Yes, we just arrived today. Welcome to Sagaro Avenue. I'm Carol. If you need a hammer, salt, or, I don't know, a companion, come on by. Thank you, Carol. That's very sweet, Sarah said, smiling. As Carol disappeared through the gate, Sarah looked back at the house. There was a lot of unpacking ahead, new neighbors, long hot weeks, and maybe more. She whispered barely audibly. Let everything work out. This time, it will work out. An hour later, most of the boxes had been moved inside. Sarah walked around the new house, arranging the jars of cereal and plates she had brought with her around the kitchen. The house was simple but cozy, a bright living room, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms. It was a bit bare, there was still furniture to be furnished, photographs to be hung on the walls, so that the new home would truly feel like home. Sarah took her time, looking at every detail. This was their chance to start over. Deep down, she hoped that a change of scenery would help refresh their marriage, which clearly lacked the same closeness and warmth. By evening, the house was bathed in the soft orange light of the sunset. The Coopers laid out folding chairs on the porch and ordered pizza. They had neither the energy nor the food to cook. They sat together, admiring the first Arizona sunset of their new life. It's beautiful, isn't it? Sarah said softly, leaning against her husband's shoulder. They could see the evening park before them. The fountain's stream shimmered softly in the sunset light, and the few passers-by strolled leisurely along the paths. The air began to cool, bringing with it the scent of dry earth and distant flowers. Aha! John hugged her around the waist and kissed her temple. It's been a long day. Sarah heard the weariness in his voice. He wasn't just tired, he seemed distant. His shoulders were hunched, and his gaze slid across the horizon, not really focusing on anything. She'd expected the move to invigorate John, to reinvigorate him, as if a new chapter would give them both a breath of fresh air. But now he sounded more exhausted than excited. Maybe it was the job. He was starting a new position next week, and he was nervous. Or maybe he was just tired of being strong. Sarah pressed herself a little closer to him. Maybe we should go for a walk after dinner, she suggested softly. We'll get to know the area, get some fresh air. The park is so nice. Maybe we'll even get some ice cream, like we used to. John shook his head without looking at her. I'd love to, my dear, but honestly, I can barely stand on my feet. My back aches, my head is buzzing. Let's go to bed early. Tomorrow we'll unpack some more boxes, and maybe it will get easier. He squeezed her hand gently. The gesture was warm, but somehow routine. Sarah smiled back, a little tensely, but tried not to show it. She knew it wasn't his fault, it just happened, and yet she felt bitter. She was tired, too, and she needed support, words, and attention. Something that would make her feel like they hadn't just moved, but had started a new life together. But now everything seemed mechanical. Boxes, lists, unpacking, water, keys, instructions. Everything was point by point, without a soul. As if they hadn't started, but had just run away from something without figuring it out. That night they went to bed, spread out on the bedroom floor among the boxes. The mattress had not yet been unfolded. There was no time for that. The sheet was crumpled under their bodies, the sounds of crickets came from the window, and a light draft fluttered the curtain brought from the old apartment. John fell asleep almost immediately, turning to the wall, his breathing even and deep. Sarah remained lying on her back, looking at the ceiling where the reflections of the street lamp danced. She sighed quietly, trying not to make any noise. Her thoughts were in a tangle. She wanted to hug him, press herself against him, feel the familiar strength of his arms, but something was stopping her. Not the fear of being pushed away, no. Rather, anxiety that inside him there was fatigue, not desire. That he was far away now, despite the closeness of his body. Sarah closed her eyes. She wanted so much to believe that new happy times were ahead of them. That this house would become a real home, not just a temporary shelter. When the day came, they would again talk not only about business, but also about feelings. That John would again look at her the way he used to, with warmth, with interest, with tenderness. And that she will again feel not just a wife, but loved, desired, a real part of his world, and not just a companion on a long road. The next morning, Sarah woke up to the bright sun shining through the blinds. Some unfamiliar birds were already chirping outside the window. The day promised to be hot and clear. John was still asleep, so Sarah quietly got out of bed, threw on a light robe, and went out onto the porch. The yard smelled of heated dust and freshly cut grass. Apparently, the gardener had already walked around the neighbors' lawns. Sarah stretched and took a deep breath of the morning air. Despite her fatigue, she was eager to start settling in. She walked down the narrow concrete path to the mailbox at the edge of the sidewalk. The sun was already hot, and her sandals slapped on the hot tiles. Sarah squinted into the light, still not accustomed to its brightness. Inside the mailbox was a fresh copy of the local newspaper, rolled up, and a couple of flyers, one for a window sale, the other for a private school. She flipped through the pages mechanically until she heard a voice behind her, full of animation and friendliness. "Hello, you are probably our new neighbors?" Sarah turned around. A smiling young woman was looking at her through a low, faded wooden fence. She appeared to be her age, about 30, with bright blue eyes, sunny red hair pulled back casually into a high ponytail, and a warm, open smile. She was wearing short shorts and a loose t-shirt that showed off her tan shoulders and arms, indicating that she had long since adapted to the local climate. The woman radiated confidence and zest for life, and there was not a hint of tension in her. On the contrary, she seemed always ready for friendship. Sarah couldn't help but smile back. "Yes, we moved in yesterday," she nodded, putting down the newspaper and taking a step closer to the fence. "Hi, welcome to our street," the stranger beamed. "I'm Emily, and my husband is Jake. We live right here, just to your right." She pointed to a neat two-story house with blue shutters and a swing on the porch. "What's your name?" "I'm Sarah. It's very nice to meet you, Emily." "Likewise." Emily leaned forward slightly, looking behind Sarah. "Where is your husband?" "John, right? I saw him unloading boxes last night, but I didn't want to disturb him. They looked tired." "He's still asleep," Sarah said with a small smile. "It's been a really crazy day. We left before it was light, and the air conditioning in the truck wasn't working. We just collapsed that night." "Oh, I believe it." Emily nodded understandingly. "We also moved here from California 2 years ago. A house full of boxes, a week without internet, and I even managed to lose a box of kitchen utensils. Can you imagine? The first 3 days we ate only cereal and noodles from plastic cups." Sarah laughed and moved closer to the fence. "We also have a fun quest ahead of us. So far, all we have is a coffee maker, a microwave, and one knife. The rest is somewhere in the depths of boxes. By the way, we are from Chicago. We decided to swap snowdrifts for cacti," she added with a smile. Oh, you'll definitely like it here, Emily perked up. Winter here is just a fairy tale. No dirty snow, no icy windshield wipers. And in the summer, of course, there's an outdoor sauna, but you get used to it quickly. The main thing is to always have a bottle of water on hand and not try to walk the dog at midday. That's good advice, Sarah chuckled. We don't have a dog, by the way, but maybe we will. It's kind of conducive to that idea. Great. We have a golden retriever, Max. He's the life of the party, especially when he sees new people. He can be a little clingy, but he doesn't bite, Emily laughed. By the way, Jake and I were just thinking about having a barbecue tonight. Just for fun, no reason, and getting to know each other better. Come over, take John, relax a bit after moving in. We'll start around 6 in the yard. We've got a grill, a table, lamps, everything, and beer, of course. Sarah felt her heart warm up at this sincere openness. She was a little taken aback by her new acquaintance's spontaneity, but her words were like a breath of fresh air. Thank you, really. We'll probably spend the whole day surrounded by boxes, but I think some socializing won't hurt. We were just saying that we should get into the life of this place a little. That's great. We're always happy to have new faces, and neighbors who don't make noise at night, Emily added with mock seriousness. I'm kidding, of course. The street here is quiet, but not boring. Until 6 then, Sarah confirmed, smiling. I'll try to get John out of the box kingdom. Agreed. Emily took a step back, already heading for the gate. Until the evening, Sarah. And if you need anything salt, a hammer, or just a talk knock, I'm almost always home. Sarah watched her go with a warm feeling, as if this dusty, not yet fully settled life had already received its first real hello. She was slightly surprised by the ease with which the conversation began. In Chicago, people were different, distant, always busy. Here, in this hot and dusty corner of Arizona, there seemed to be a place for simplicity, and perhaps for new friends. Well, now let's share. What city are you from, and do you have any funny or strange stories? The neighbor waved and disappeared behind the gate. Sarah returned to the house, feeling a little encouraged. It seemed that the neighbors were very nice. She immediately went up to the bedroom to wake her husband. John sleepily muttered that it was still early, but when he learned that the neighbors were inviting them to a barbecue today, he finally woke up and even hugged his wife joyfully. Oddly enough, he was also interested in chatting. Sarah noted his enthusiasm with relief. This was a good sign. Perhaps they would make friends in the new place, and John would be able to take a break from work. In the evening, Sarah and John, a little worried, headed to the neighbor's house. In the backyard of the Millers, as the neighbor's family was called, the grill was already burning, and the smoke of roasting meat smelled deliciously. Garden furniture was set out under the canopy, and on the table were bowls of salad and cold drinks. Emily waved at them warmly. Come in, we're glad you came. She was wearing a light sleeveless dress, white with small blue flowers, and barefoot, as if the atmosphere of the evening itself did not require unnecessary formality. In one hand, she held a glass of white wine, and with the other, she gestured for the guests to enter the courtyard. The garden was cozy. The light from a garland of bulbs softly illuminated the table with snacks, the grill smoked, spreading the aroma of spices and fried meat. Folding chairs were placed everywhere, and in the corner there was a portable speaker from which jazz with a touch of southern mood was softly coming. A tall man was bustling about the grill, fair-haired and lean, with a short beard and a weathered face. He wore a simple black t-shirt and denim shorts, and his movements were confident and polished. When he saw the guests, he looked up and smiled broadly. Hello, hello. Are you our new neighbors, the Coopers? It's very nice to meet you. I'm Jake. He walked towards them, wiping his hands on a towel, and extended his hand first to John, then to Sarah. His handshake was firm, warm, like a man who spoke more in deeds than in words. When he looked at Sarah, his eyes bright blue, like the midday sky, lingered on her a little longer than usual, and although his gaze was friendly, there was something watchful, almost appraising in them. Sarah, slender, in a light summer blouse and jeans, with her dark hair pulled back into a careless bun, suddenly felt her cheeks flush slightly. "Nice to meet you, Sarah," Jake said with a slight nod. "Likewise," she replied, trying to keep her voice even, but she still met his gaze a little longer than normal etiquette required. Something in her chest fluttered strangely, not alarmingly, but unexpectedly. She turned back to Emily immediately, almost automatically. "It's so great that you arranged everything for us," she said to her neighbor sincerely, trying to switch gears. "We didn't even have time to treat you to anything." "Come on," Emily waved her hand cheerfully. "You just moved in, today is our turn to host. But then, when you get settled in, be sure to invite us to your housewarming party. I love house tours, especially when everything is already set up." "We will, once we've sorted out the boxes," John assured, taking the offered chair near the table. He looked a little more relaxed than he had during the day, and seemed to enjoy the opportunity to just sit with his neighbors without thinking about business. "Want a beer, John?" Jake asked, already heading for the fridge in the corner of the terrace. "We have a California IPA, or if you want something stronger, I have bourbon, but that's later." "The beer is excellent, thank you," John responded. "In this heat, bourbon is heroism." "What about you, Sarah?" Emily turned to her. "Wine, beer, juice? We're practically a bar here." "Wine, please. White, if you have any," she replied gratefully, smiling again. Soon the air was filled with the smell of grilled steaks. Someone turned up the volume on a playlist. John and Jake started talking about cars and old pickups, and Sarah, holding a glass, settled into a wicker chair next to Emily. "So what were you doing in Chicago?" Emily asked, turning a little closer to her, like a friend ready for a long, heartfelt conversation. "I worked in the accounting department of a large company. Boring, tedious, lots of numbers," Sarah answered with a half smile. "Sometimes it seemed like I was just counting other people's dreams in a spreadsheet." Emily laughed, softly, understandingly. "And now? And now, I hope it's different." Sarah glanced at John, who was talking and gesturing excitedly. "Maybe slower, warmer, real." Emily nodded slightly, as if she had caught more in those words than just a change of pace. And Sarah suddenly felt like she wanted to tell him more, but perhaps not now, not on the first night, not with Jake looking at her from time to time, as if something about her aroused more than just neighborly interest in him. Emily poured wine for the guests. Jake, meanwhile, placed the brown steaks on a platter and joined the others. It was already dark, strings of lanterns lit up the yard, crickets chirped softly. The air was filled with the smoke of mesquite charcoal and the aroma of rich spices. The atmosphere was cozy and conducive to candor. "Chicago's a great city, but the weather is brutal." Jake shook his head. "Emily and I are both from Cali, San Diego. We lived in San Francisco for a couple of years, though, and then we moved here to Arizona. We decided we wanted more sun and less city stress." "How do you like it here?" asked Sarah, after tasting the salad. Emily smiled brightly. She stroked Jake's hand affectionately, and he winked at her. "We really like it. There's such freedom here. You know, in the evening when you go out into the backyard, the sky is starry. Sometimes at night Weskini depingui arrange it," she giggled. "Oh, excuse me, I don't know how to say it in Russian. We swim naked in the pool or in the lake in the park. No one bothers us, it's beautiful." John choked on his wine in surprise, but Jake and Emily just laughed. Sarah felt a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. "You won't get bored with these neighbors. The main thing is, don't be scared. We are an open people. We like to joke." Jake winked, slapping John on the shoulder in a friendly way. "If anything, you are welcome to our pool at any time. Bathing suits are optional." He laughed again, making it clear that this was a joke. John smiled tightly back, unsure of what to say. Sarah nudged her husband lightly with her elbow, as if to say, "Relax." Then the conversation turned to more ordinary topics. The neighbors told about the best stores nearby, about how wild rabbits sometimes ran into their house in the morning, about the nearest gym, where Jake invited John to go together sometime. Sarah gradually relaxed. Emily and Jake were very friendly and clearly wanted to be friends. Emily asked her about Chicago, how Sarah spends her time, what her hobbies are. Sarah told her that she likes to cook and does yoga. Emily was delighted. How wonderful. I love yoga too. Maybe we can do it together in the morning. I just happen to have some spare mats. Sarah happily agreed, thinking that she could use some company. A couple of hours later, dinner was over. By that time, the grill had cooled, the glasses had emptied, and the conversation had moved from formal greetings to stories, funny stories from past lives, discussions of local schools, and funny quirks of the county. Garlands were already glowing above the yard, the first stars were scattered in the sky, and the air had finally become bearable with notes of grass and smoke left over from the barbecue. Sarah felt her body pleasantly heavy after the food and wine, and inside there was a surprising calm that she hadn't felt for a long time. John seemed to relax a little, too. He laughed, kept up the conversation, even told one of his favorite stories about a funny breakdown at work. He sat a little closer to her than usual and involuntarily touched her hand a couple of times, and it was pleasant, as if something familiar was beginning to return. Finally, when Jake announced that one more beer and he'd fall asleep right in the lounge chair, the Coopers got ready to go home. "Thank you very much. Everything was delicious, and we had a great time," Sarah thanked, getting up from her seat and straightening her hair, which had become disheveled by the light evening breeze. "Of course, we are very pleased to meet you ourselves," Jake replied with a wide smile, walking up to the gate and opening it. His gaze on Sarah still retained that same soft, slightly teasing attentiveness, but was still friendly. Emily, swaying slightly from her third glass of wine and humming an old pop hit, suddenly came closer cheerfully, casually hugged Sarah and kissed her on the cheek. "Good night, dears," she said with theatrical warmth, "and welcome to our quiet, slightly crazy neighborhood." Then, unexpectedly, even for herself, she turned to John and kissed him on the cheek too quickly, noisily, as if in friendship. John froze a little and smiled awkwardly, lowering his eyes, and Sarah only glanced at him, then at Emily and smiled again sincerely, but a little tensely. They said goodbye and headed down the street-lit path to their home. John walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, and was the first to break the silence. "The neighbors look like they'll be interesting," he said with a grin, shaking his head. Sarah laughed softly without looking at him. "That's true," she said, picking up the hem of her blouse so as not to catch it on a bush by the path. Something stirred inside her. Interesting was an understatement. Emily was friendly and bright. Jake was charming, perhaps a little too charming. It might have seemed a little odd, but it wasn't alarming. On the contrary, it all felt alive, real. After the gray routine of Chicago and the alienation of the last few months, it was almost intoxicating. Deep down, she felt that life in Arizona would definitely not be boring with these people. And she was surprised to realize that for the first time in a long time, she was looking forward to tomorrow with a light, pleasant excitement. Several days passed quietly. John threw himself into his new job, leaving early in the morning and returning for dinner tired but happy. Meanwhile, Sarah took care of the house, unpacking boxes, going shopping, and getting the kitchen in order. The neighbors were often in sight. Emily would pop in for a cup of coffee and a chat in the afternoon, or Jake would wave to John when they both walked out to their cars at the same time in the morning. Life was gradually settling into a new routine. On one of those hot afternoons, Sarah decided to rearrange the furniture in the living room. She thought the sofa would look better by the window. However, moving the heavy sofa alone turned out to be an impossible task. She was already sweating, stubbornly pushing it a few centimeters at a time, when a voice came from the front door. "Sarah, do you need help?" She looked up. Jake was standing in the doorway. He was wearing work jeans and an old t-shirt. Stained with paint, he had obviously been doing something in his room. Sweat had beaded on his forehead. "Oh, Jake. Sorry, that must have been noisy," she said, embarrassed, catching her breath. "I wanted to move the couch." Jake considered the situation for a second and smiled broadly. "It's nothing. Let me help you." He strode confidently inside, and together they easily moved the bulky sofa to the window. Sarah laughed with relief. Thank you so much. I was already thinking I would give up on this idea. Jake wiped his sweaty forehead with his palm. You're welcome. You can always come to me if you need to move something heavy or fix it. I'm often stuck at home, so don't be shy, okay? Okay, I promise, Sarah nodded gratefully. Would you like some water or lemonade? It's unbearably hot today. Water would be nice, thank you, he agreed. Sarah went into the kitchen and returned with 2 cold bottles. They settled down on the now moved sofa, catching their breath. Jake took a couple of big gulps and sighed blissfully. That's what I needed. Thank you, Sarah. They sat in silence for a few seconds, enjoying the coolness of the water and the silence. Sarah caught herself thinking that this was the first time she was alone with Jake and suddenly felt embarrassed, not knowing what to talk about. But her neighbor himself broke the pause. How do you like it here? Are you getting used to it little by little? Yeah, she said. It's still a little weird, of course. New house, new people. But I like it. And you and Emily really make us feel at home, honestly. Jake turned to face her, and Sarah met his gaze, her brown eyes dancing with mischief. We're always happy to have good people in our neighborhood, and you and John are great. Sarah smiled, looking down. Thank you. I hope we're not bothering you too much. What are you saying? He drawled softly. Emily and I, on the contrary, enjoy company. We're quite open. Maybe you've already noticed, he chuckled. Sarah remembered Emily's frank jokes and her goodbye kiss and laughed. Well, a little. Jake also laughed quietly, and then, taking another sip of water, suddenly asked seriously, And how are you doing here? More precisely, what are you planning to do? You said, I think, that you are not working yet. Sarah shrugged. For now, yes, I took a break. I used to work at a school as a teacher, but now I'm thinking about changing something. Maybe I'll find something part-time or remote. I haven't decided yet. I want to take a little break, recover from the move. I understand, he nodded. Emily, for example, also didn't immediately find what to do here. She is a designer by education. Now she freelances a little from home. Oh, great. I'll have to ask her to help with interior design ideas. Sarah perked up. Be sure to ask, she'll like it. Jake smiled. And I'm an engineer myself. I work remotely, so I'm home often. Sarah noted to herself, this is why he is always at hand. By the way, Jake continued, if you need anything around the house tools, a drill, a stepladder, feel free to ask. I have plenty of that stuff. Okay, we agreed. Sarah felt warm gratitude towards him. The neighbor really was very kind. She put the empty bottle on the coffee table. At that moment, a suspicious scraping sound was heard from the shelf above the table. A vase, apparently moved when rearranging the furniture, suddenly wobbled and flew down. Be careful, was all Sarah managed to exhale. Jake leaned forward sharply, trying to catch the vase. Sarah also rushed forward, and they collided. The vase softly plopped down on the sofa between the cushions and survived, but Sarah lost her balance and fell by inertia right on her neighbor. There was silence for a few seconds. Sarah lay on top of Jake, her eyes wide with astonishment. Jake could hear his own heart pounding. The warmth of her body, the soft scent of her hair, instantly made him dizzy. Her hand involuntarily pressed against his chest, hot and hard under the thin fabric of his t-shirt. Jake instinctively wrapped his arms around her waist to keep her from falling to the floor. Their faces were so close that if Sarah moved forward even slightly, their noses would touch. Sarah's heart began to pound. This was it, that moment when a spark seemed to fly through the air. She felt the warmth of his body and saw her silhouette reflected in the depths of his eyes. Time seemed to stand still. Jake was the first to come to, his lips twitching in an embarrassed half-smile. I think I got it, he said hoarsely, still holding on to her waist. Sarah finally came to her senses. A hot wave of shame and something else burned her. She hurriedly tried to get up. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hurt you. He gently helped her up, lifting himself off the couch. Taking a step back, Sarah tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, avoiding his gaze. "It's okay," Jake said softly. "No one was hurt." They both laughed awkwardly, trying to lighten the mood. Sarah grabbed the rescued vase and nervously placed it back on the shelf, away from the edge. "Thank you. And forgive me, for God's sake," she chattered. "What a bungler." "Hey, it's okay." Jake put his hand on her shoulder for a brief moment. "I told you, I always catch what I fall. Calm down." His hand squeezed her shoulder briefly, and for some reason Sarah felt it all over her body. She nodded, trying hard to look okay, even though her heart was still pounding. There was silence in the living room. Jake removed his hand from her waist, and the space between them suddenly felt too big, too noticeable. He straightened up, ran his hand down his neck, and looked around, as if seeking an excuse to linger a moment longer. "Well, it looks like a mission accomplished. The couch is still there, you're safe, the floor isn't scratched," he said with a slight smile. "I should get back to my renovation, otherwise Emily will kill me if I don't finish the bathroom tile." The words were playful, the tone was habitually casual, but his gaze, before he looked away, still lingered on her a little longer than was required by a normal neighborly visit. Yeah, sure," Sarah quickly chimed in, taking a step back as if coming back to reality. There was relief in her voice, but somewhere inside it was mixed with a strange sense of loss, as if she'd just woken up from a dream. "Thanks again, Jake. I definitely couldn't have done it without you." He was already at the door. His hand touched the handle, and at that moment he turned around. His face lingered for a second in the semi-darkness of the doorway, and his voice sounded a little quieter, a hoarse velvet. "Contact me if anything, Sarah." He said her name in a special way, not just as a formality, but as if he was putting something else into it. She didn't know what, but for some reason her heart sank and froze. The door closed. The house was quiet again, except for the ticking clock and the faint hum of the air conditioner. Sarah stood at the entrance, motionless, her back against the cool wall. Her cheeks were flushed. She covered her face with her hands, as if she wanted to wipe away both the color and the memory. The scene kept coming back to him. Her on top of him, his hands on her hips, their faces so close, their breaths mingling, and for a split second it seemed like, what if she hadn't pulled away? "Oh God," she whispered and exhaled, trying to calm her heartbeat. It was just a stupid accident. A stupid, awkward situation in which there was nothing reprehensible. He simply helped her move a heavy sofa. Everything else is a figment of the imagination, nothing more. Who hasn't experienced it? From fatigue, heat, loneliness. But some part of her, the part that had been asleep lately, dulled by routine, the move, the silence between her and John, that part suddenly woke up. It didn't give in to logic. It didn't accept excuses. She remembered the warmth of his palms, the heat of his body, the way the name Sarah sounded from his lips, too soft, too personal. She stood there for a few minutes until the shaking in her knees subsided. Then she took a deep breath, straightened up, and went into the kitchen, mechanically checking the stove, opening the refrigerator, as if trying to ground herself. That evening, at dinner, the tension was still there. She was quieter than usual. She twirled the food on her plate with her fork, picked at her salad, barely touching it. John didn't seem to notice he was sharing his first impressions of work. New colleagues, normal guys, a strict but to the point boss, a terrible lunch machine. "And guess what?" he said, slicing a chicken breast. "They're still using some old inventory system. I'll have to clean this all up by the end of the month. Funny, huh?" Sarah nodded and forced a smile. Yes, funny. She listened, but did not hear. The echo of that day's moment still hummed in her chest. She wanted to tell me, to laugh together, to say, "Imagine how stupid that was. I almost fell, and Jake caught me, and we crashed into the couch," and put an end to it. Make this memory safe, normal, but she couldn't. Something was holding her back. Something that hadn't been between them before. Not fear, not guilt, but perhaps a subtle sense that sharing this would open a door that might be best left closed, or, conversely, would would point to what had been so scarce between her and John lately: spontaneity, physical intimacy, heat. Not the sweat of moving, but the heat of true desire. She glanced at her husband. He was chewing, his head buried in his food, slightly hunched over, familiar, close. And yet, now he seemed a little further away than usual. Sarah looked down and continued her dinner in silence, swallowing the cold piece with difficulty. After dinner, they watched a movie, but Sarah barely followed the plot. The scene on the couch was in her mind's eye. She kept sneaking glances at her husband, trying to convince herself that nothing had happened between her and Jake, just some nonsense. So why did her heart skip a beat at the mere memory? When the movie ended, John stretched and was about to go to bed. Sarah unexpectedly put her hand on his shoulder. "You know, maybe we should sit a little longer," she asked quietly. "It's been a while since we've talked." John raised his eyebrows in surprise, but smiled. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Sarah didn't know where to start. She asked about work, and he again became engrossed in stories about the project. She listened with half an ear, mostly admiring how his face came alive when talking about his favorite thing. She felt a little sad. They hadn't managed to talk about something intimate, personal for a long time. "And how do you spend your days?" John finally asked, coming to his senses. "Have you settled in at home yet?" Sarah shrugged. "Getting settled. Today, I redid some small things. Emily came by in the morning, then Jake helped with the furniture." "Yeah," John nodded. "Great guys, huh? We're lucky." "Uh-huh. Very cute," she quietly agreed. John yawned and hugged his wife by the shoulders. "Well, shall we go to bed, dear? We have to get up early tomorrow." Sarah suddenly realized that she didn't want to just lie back to back and fall asleep again. She wanted closeness for John to dispel the confusing thoughts that had been swirling around in her head all day. She ran her fingers gently over his chest. "Maybe we can stay here," she whispered, looking into his eyes. "I missed you." John smiled, not immediately realizing the hint. But when it did, a pleasant surprise flashed in his eyes. "Sarah, you're right, we haven't. For a long time." He didn't finish, but with his free hand, he stroked her back. She reached for his lips, and he kissed her back, a little hesitantly at first, but soon confidently, as if he was glad to feel close again. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. She clung to this feeling as if it were a lifeline, as if it were proof that it could still be returned. Drowning greedily in the familiar scent and taste of her husband, she tried to drive away the ghost of someone else's touch that had haunted her all day, itching on her skin and burning from within. John pressed her to himself, his hands sliding under her t-shirt, finding the familiar curves. Sarah breathed softly into his lips, half a moan, half a cry. It had been so long since they had allowed themselves to forget themselves like this. Not casually, not in the shadow of fatigue, but simply from desire. It seemed that everything was finally falling into place. But after a few minutes, she began to feel that something was wrong. Not with him, but with her. His movements were soft, but there was no fire in them, no thirst that made goosebumps run through the body. He caressed her as he had done many times before, habitually, confidently, according to a well-worn scenario. Reality inexorably returned. No matter how hard he tried, something in her resisted. Sarah tried to focus on the sensations, his breath, the warmth of his hands, the weight of his body. But instead, an image popped into her head, brown eyes staring at her, a voice whispering her name at the door, strong arms supporting her as she fell no. Not this now. She bit her lip as if she wanted to erase the memory along with that slight taste of guilt and embarrassment. "Are you not feeling well?" John whispered, raising his head slightly and noticing her sudden tension. "It's okay," she answered quietly, forcing herself to smile. "Go on." She stroked his cheek, trying to focus again, to feel the warmth again, to feel warmth. Nodded, obediently, almost automatically. But the fire, if it had been there, was already fading. His kisses became less frequent, his movements slower, and after a couple of minutes, John simply froze, pulling away with a guilty sigh. "Sorry," he muttered, not meeting her gaze. "I'm probably tired. Let's lie down. Sarah felt a sharp stab of disappointment, but she suppressed it. Instead of answering, she kissed him softly on the cheek, lightly, comfortingly, the way a wife is taught to be supportive. It's okay, darling. Of course. Let's go to sleep. They moved into the bedroom. John wrapped himself in a sheet and fell asleep almost immediately, barely touching the pillow. Sarah lay on her back, not touching him, looking at the ceiling, where the shadows from the street lamp danced. Inside there was silence, filled with thoughts. She didn't understand exactly what she wanted. Either for him to suddenly wake up, turn to her, hug her, want her again, proved both to herself and to her that there was still passion between them. Or, on the contrary, she wanted solitude and silence to unravel this knot within herself. Desire, guilt, confusion. Sarah realized that she hadn't had a moment of real alone time all day since Jake had left. She had avoided silence, filled it with activities, conversations, dinner, even sex, all to avoid being alone with what was going on inside. And now, in the darkness, in the silence, in a house that still smelled of boxes and fresh paint, she was overcome by the very thought she had been trying to suppress. What if it's not John? What if it's her? Sarah rolled over quietly, away from her sleeping husband, and wrapped herself in a sheet, staring at the wall. She didn't cry. She just lay there and listened to the man next to her breathe evenly, the man she loved, or once loved. Or maybe I just forgot. What is it like to feel? The next day, John stayed late at work. Sarah was eating dinner alone, then cleaning up the kitchen when she heard muffled voices and laughter outside. She pulled the curtain over the window facing the yard and glanced at the miller's house. There was a light on in the backyard, splashing water, and cheerful shouts. Apparently, the neighbors had decided to take a late-night dip in the pool. Sarah was about to walk away when she suddenly caught her name. Do you think Sarah? The voice belonged to Emily. She's cute. That's Jake's voice. Sarah was wary. Were they talking about her? It was not nice to eavesdrop, but curiosity got the better of her. She turned off the light in the kitchen to remain unnoticed and quietly opened the window. I don't know yet, Emily's voice came through, but I think she would. Why not? You saw the way they looked at us at the barbecue when I mentioned the lake. Sarah blushed. Yes, Jake chuckled. And John is a totally shy guy. Sarah's heart jumped. What were they talking about? Why not? Maybe she hadn't heard everything. There was a splash of water and Emily's contented laughter. Let's see. I'd love to. They're cute. I wonder if they've ever tried. The end of the sentence was drowned out by the noise of the water. Sarah tensed, her heart pounding. What the hell were the neighbors talking about? What would they be happy to do? Before she could finish her thought, she heard Jake's voice more clearly. Well, enough about that. Come here. His intonation changed to gentle and slightly playful. You know what turns me on. Emily gasped softly, apparently at his touch, and giggled. What then, Mr. Miller? When my wife swims naked in front of the neighbors, Jake whispered hoarsely, and Sarah clearly heard the passion in his voice. Do you think they're watching? Emily breathed. Surely, Sarah might be standing by the window right now. Jake continued teasingly. Sarah bit her lip. Did he know? Of course not. He was just saying. But the thought sent a shiver through her body. Then let's give them a show, Emily breathed out with a laugh. Then something happened that took Sarah's breath away. Behind the low fence, the shadows of bodies merged. In the moonlight, Sarah could see naked bodies flashing, the water glistening on their skin. Loud moans and splashing water were heard. The Millers were clearly not shy. They made love right in the pool, under the open sky. Sarah froze, covering her mouth with her hand. She should leave immediately, close the window, and stop peeping. But she couldn't tear herself away. The naked figures in the moonlight moved in the water in a passionate rhythm. She could hear Emily screaming with pleasure, Jake breathing heavily, shouting some low, hoarse words, obviously turning her on even more. Sarah's cheeks flushed. She felt her own breathing quicken. The scene before her eyes was mesmerizing, inviting, despite the taboo nature of the moment. It was the first time she had seen someone else's intimate closeness so openly and with people she knew personally. Her body responded involuntarily. Her chest tensed under the thin fabric of her top. A languid warmth spread through her lower abdomen. Sarah pressed her forehead to the cool glass, not noticing how hard she was breathing. Outside, the passions reached their peak. Emily's moans became louder, mixed with Jake's hoarse cries. At some point, Emily screamed especially piercingly, and then everything died down, only the water splashed softly against the edge of the pool. Sarah came to her senses and recoiled from the window as if she had been burned. Her heart was pounding, her body was on fire. She quickly pulled the curtain closed, trying to stop her hands from shaking. She couldn't believe that she had just allowed herself to spy on her neighbors and even get excited about it. She felt ashamed and at the same time sweet. Standing alone in the dark kitchen, Sarah realized that for the first time in a long time, she really wanted intimacy. I wanted to feel the same frantic desire that had just played out behind the fence. And for the first time in these fantasies, she imagined someone other than her husband in the place of her partner. In the morning, John, getting ready for work, hesitantly announced that he would have to fly away for a couple of days on a business trip, an urgent meeting with clients in another state. Sarah tried to hide her disappointment and wished him luck. He kissed her on the cheek. "Don't be bored here without me, okay? I'll be back soon." She nodded and smiled, although her heart was clawing at the cats. Left alone, Sarah felt completely broken. Thoughts about the previous night and everything that had happened did not give her peace. To distract herself, she kept herself busy all day. She vacuumed the house, went grocery shopping, even jogged around the neighborhood. But nothing helped as soon as she stopped. Her head filled with images again. Here is Jake smiling at her. Here is his body merging with Emily's in the water. In the evening, Sarah realized that she couldn't stand sitting within four walls. She decided to take a walk to the park by the lake. A warm wind played in the crowns of the palm trees. The sky was painted in pink and purple shades of sunset. Sarah wandered along the paths, trying to put her feelings in order. Returning home already at dusk, she ran into Jake. The neighbor was standing at the gate of his yard, holding a pair of garden shears in his hands, apparently trimming the bushes along the fence. When he saw Sarah, he smiled. "Hello, walk?" "Yeah." Decided to get some fresh air, she stopped, not knowing whether to go further or exchange a few words. After the night of peeping, she felt awkward meeting him. Jake seemed to notice her stiffness. "Everything is fine?" "Yes, of course. John is just away, that's why." She stopped. Jake nodded understandingly. "I see. Emily's not home today, either she went to a hen party at her friend's. So we're both abandoned for the sake of our other half's fun," he joked. Sarah smiled at the corners of her lips. There was a pause. "Listen," Jake said hesitantly. "Would you like to come in for a minute? Tea, coffee? I don't like to dine alone." Sarah's heart fluttered. Here it was, the temptation, was it worth agreeing to? But refusing without an apparent reason would also be strange. I don't even know." She hesitated. Jake added quickly, "Just in a friendly way. No hidden meaning. Just neighbors having dinner together, that's all." Sarah glanced at the dark windows of her house and suddenly felt a strong reluctance to return to the empty rooms. She made up her mind. "Okay, I agree with tea." Jake held the gate open for her, letting her in. They walked into the backyard, where a porch lamp was burning. The air was filled with the scent of night-blooming flowers, and the smoke from the grill, which had recently been turned off, was still there, as if Jake had been cooking his dinner. "Have a seat, I'll be right there." He pointed to a wicker sofa on the veranda and disappeared into the house. Sarah sank down onto the soft pillows. Her heart was pounding somewhere in her throat. She looked around. She still hadn't understood the neighbors' conversations yesterday morning, but now, sitting here alone with Jake, she felt strangely anxious and excited at the same time. Jake returned with 2 glasses of wine and a plate of sliced fruit. "Instead of tea, a cold Chardonnay," he said, handing her a glass. "I suppose you won't refuse?" "Quite. Sarah accepted the glass and took a sip. The cool wine pleasantly refreshed and relaxed her slightly tense nerves. For a while, they just sat there, talking about trivial things, the weather, how beautiful the sun had set that day. Gradually, the tension eased from Sarah, and the conversation flowed easily. "You know, I'm glad you came," Jake said suddenly, changing the conversation to a softer tone. "I've been alone all evening. I'm not used to being without Emily." Sarah nodded. "I've also gotten out of the habit of being alone. Before, when John worked late or went somewhere, I always found something to do. But here, I don't really know anyone except you." "Then get to know us better," Jake smiled, looking straight into her eyes. "We're always here." Sarah felt something stir inside her. She looked down at her glass, twirling it in her fingers. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said quietly after a pause. "Yes," Sarah looked up at him. He paused, as if choosing his words. "Did you hear anything strange last night? Amy and I. We're probably making noise. If so, I'm sorry." Sarah felt her whole face flush. He was asking so bluntly. She looked down. "I heard a little bit." The honesty escaped against my will. "Sorry," he repeated quietly, moving a little closer. "We can be too reckless sometimes." Sarah didn't know what to say. The image of the previous night flashed between them, unspoken but obvious. "You're just happy," she finally whispered. "That's great." Jake looked at her carefully, his voice also dropping to a whisper. "Are you happy, Sarah?" This simple question caught her off guard. A lump rose in her throat. Yes, of course. That is." She herself was not sure that she was telling the truth. "Of course?" he asked carefully, and there was genuine concern in his tone. Sarah felt a treacherous moisture in her eyes. She never thought she would burst into tears in front of her neighbor. "It's complicated," she whispered, nervously rubbing her fingers on her wrist. "I'm sorry, I don't want to burden you with my—" "It's stupid." She tried to smile through the tears that were welling up. But Jake had already moved very close and gently covered her hand with his. "Hey, it's okay. You can tell me if you want." His warm touch and concern made Sarah unable to bear it. Tears started flowing of their own accord. She covered her face with her free hand, trying to hold back her sobs. "I'm sorry. It's just, I feel terrible," she finally said. Jake was silent, gently stroking her trembling fingers. Miss," she sobbed. "This must be some kind of stupid crisis. I'm sorry." "SHH, it's okay," he whispered, carefully hugging her shoulders. Sarah herself did not understand how she found herself in his arms. She needed warm participation, simple human warmth so much now. She buried her face in his chest, feeling how hard he was breathing. Jake stroked her back, letting her cry. Gradually, the convulsive sobs subsided. Sarah, embarrassed, wanted to pull away, but Jake did not let go instead. He smoothly raised his hand to her face and wiped a tear from her cheek. "It's okay, Sarah," he said quietly. "You're not alone." She looked up. Jake's face was very close. There was tenderness in his gaze and something else that made her dizzy. "Jake," she whispered, not knowing what she wanted to say. "SHH," he put his finger to her lips. "Don't say anything." And the next moment he leaned down and softly kissed her lips, salty from tears. Sarah froze. It seemed that her mind was screaming at her to back away immediately, but her body did not obey. The sweet warmth from his lips spread inside her, sweeping away all the arguments of reason. Jake was about to pull away, but then Sarah herself reached out to him, kissing him back. Their lips met again, this time more greedily, hungrily, as if a dam of suppressed desires had burst. Sarah felt him pull her closer, hungrily. His tongue slid insistently into her mouth, and she gave in without a fight, surrendering to the sensations. Her head was spinning. "Sarah." Jake breathed out hoarsely, breaking the kiss only to catch his breath, his hands already wandering down her back. "Please," she whispered, not recognizing her own voice. "Don't stop." These words tore away the last doubts. Jake picked her up in his arms, causing Sarah to cry out in surprise and carried her into the house. She wrapped her arms around his neck, continuing to shower his neck and cheek with kisses. They barely made it to the living room before Jake lowered her onto the soft couch and almost pressed his lips to her neck. Sarah moaned, feeling goosebumps run across her skin. His hands slid under her blouse, feeling her breasts. Sarah arched up to meet them, feeling her insides ablaze. She pulled her blouse off with trembling fingers, leaving her in a lacy bra. Jake paused for a second, admiring her half-naked figure in the flickering light of the lamp. "You are beautiful," he whispered with such sincerity that Sarah caught her breath. He leaned down and pressed his lips to the valley between her breasts, peppering her skin with hot kisses. Sarah moaned louder, running her fingers through his hair. She felt his body tense, how he was barely holding himself back. "Jake, please," escaped her lips. He understood without words. In one movement, he unfastened and pulled off her bra, freeing her full, firm breasts. His palms covered the soft curves, his fingers caressed the tense pink nipples. Sarah cried out in bliss. Desire pulsed between her thighs. Her thighs parted on their own, inviting him. Jake, breathing heavily, pulled away from her breasts to pull her skirt and panties off. Sarah quickly helped, throwing off the rest of her clothes, completely forgetting about shame. The next moment, she began to pull his clothes off. His t-shirt flew to the floor, followed by his jeans. Sarah gasped when he appeared naked in front of her. His body seemed chiseled, muscular, and most importantly, she saw his powerful male body, betraying how much he desired her. Jake lowered himself above her, kissing her lips again, her neck, her chest, her stomach. Sarah writhed beneath him, feeling like a hot piece of metal ready to melt. Finally, he settled between her spread knees. Sarah wrapped her thighs around him, pulling him closer in anticipation. Their eyes met in the last moment of the silent question, and she only whispered hotly, "Yes, please." Jake paused for a second, apparently enjoying the sensation. Then he slowly pulled back and thrust again, deeper this time. Sarah moaned into his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. It was delicious, forbidden, and insanely delicious. Sarah was lost in the sensations. She responded to his every thrust, moving forward, faster and faster. There was nothing else around her, no houses, no obligations, no past. Just the two of them, intertwined in a fit of passion. The unfulfilled desire that had been building up for months, years, was rapidly carrying her to the top. Sarah felt a tight spiral rapidly twisting in her lower abdomen. "Oh God, Jake," she moaned incoherently, arching. They lay there for a moment, breathing heavily, holding each other. There was silence, as if the air itself was holding its breath, afraid to destroy this fragile, almost unreal moment. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest, her blood was pounding in her ears, her fingers were still shaking, as if her body couldn't believe that this had actually happened. She could barely see anything in the dim light of the room, but she could feel it every unevenness of his skin, the warm breath on her temple, and the outline of Jake's face, close and disturbingly familiar. Slowly coming to her senses, she felt him lean down, lightly brush his lips across her forehead, then gently stroke her tangled hair. His movements were gentle, careful, as if he feared that one wrong touch would destroy the fragile peace they had immersed themselves in. "Are you okay?" he whispered, almost inaudibly, but there was genuine concern in his voice. Sarah pressed her forehead to his collarbone, inhaled deeply of his scent, foreign, yet strangely comforting, and suddenly felt tears begin to roll down her cheeks. Not violent, not hysterical, quiet, almost unnoticeable. Tears of relief, mixed with shame, with pain, with the realization that something inside her had changed. Or maybe opened up. "Yes," she answered just as quietly, her voice trembling. "Everything is fine." She closed her eyes and froze, clinging to him like a last safe island. There was no point in asking what now. There was no point in saying it was a mistake or that it shouldn't have happened. She already knew all that. But now here, in this silence, in his arms, she felt alive. And yet, deep in my soul, a thought glided like a shadow. And what will happen in the morning? What will happen when the darkness dissipates, when the light displaces their secret, when she sees John's eyes again and remembers that in her life there is a home, responsibilities, history, love, albeit familiar, tired, but still real? She didn't know the answer, and maybe she didn't want to know, for now. When Sarah woke up in the morning, she didn't realize where she was at first. Light was filtering through the blinds, falling in stripes on the floor and the couch. The room was alien. Her body was naked. The blanket, awkwardly draped over her, had slipped slightly, revealing her shoulder. She was lying on her side, in absolute silence, except for the measured hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of running water. Memories slowly appeared in her head, as if through a fog: the night, the breath, the skin, Jake, their insane closeness, her hands on his back, his lips on her neck, them, together, on this couch. Sarah sat up abruptly, her heart pounding loudly and dully in her chest. Panic washed over her like a wave. She looked around, as if searching for a way to escape, to erasure, to salvation. Jake was gone. The sound of the shower came from behind the door. He must have just walked in. She quickly bent down, groping for her clothes on the floor. Her skirt was crumpled under the sofa, her blouse on the back of the chair. Her underwear was lying nearby, next to her sandals. Her fingers were shaking. It was as if she was sneaking away from a crime scene. What have I done? Flashed through my head. She pulled on her clothes quickly, barely feeling the material. Every sound behind the wall seemed too loud. Every movement seemed to be under surveillance. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve, not to face this morning. But the footsteps were already approaching. With a dull click, the bathroom door opened, and Jake appeared in the doorway, barefoot, wearing only jeans, with a towel thrown over his shoulders. He was wiping his wet hair, and when he noticed Sarah, he froze. The silence between them was heavy, tense. She pulled up her skirt and buttoned her blouse the second their gazes met. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes: surprise, remorse, tenderness, wariness. Sarah was the first to break the silence. Her voice was barely audible. "I have to go." Jake dropped the towel on the table as if by instinct and nodded. "Of course, I'll take you." "No need," she interrupted, a little more sharply than she intended. She looked away. "Please." He fell silent. It was obvious that he wanted to say something else, but the words wouldn't come. Sarah walked past him, almost brushing his shoulder. The air between them was tense, prickly, like an exposed nerve. At the threshold, she slowed down for a split second. Without turning around, she heard his voice behind her, quiet but very distinct. "Sarah, shall we talk?" She stopped, took a breath, clenched her hands into fists. She shook her head. "Not now. I can't." And without waiting for an answer, she opened the door. The sun cut into her eyes. She blinked and only then realized that she was almost running. Through the quiet street, past familiar flower beds, past Emily's yard, past her own porch, where boxes had stood not long ago. Her heart was pounding like a drum, her palms were sweaty, her hair was sticking to her neck. She ran into the house, slammed the door behind her, and pressed her back against it. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Everything inside screamed, "For what?" Sarah slid down the door, hugging her knees, and sat on the floor. The silence of the house suddenly became frighteningly thick, as if the walls knew, as if the shadows knew. What did she do? What to do now? How to live with this? What if John feels it, see it, asks it, or worse, not will ask? Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held back. She couldn't afford weakness now. She had to suppress everything, hide it, plug this crack before it became irreversible. But it won't be forgotten. The image of Jake came back to her mind. His face in the dim light, his lips whispering her name, the warmth of his body next to her. It couldn't be erased, and she knew there would be a price to pay one day. But now, not now. Now you just need to breathe, and be silent, and pretend that nothing happened. In her home, she literally collapsed on the bed and burst into tears. She felt unbearably ashamed, hurt, and, at the same time, Part of her still rejoiced at the pleasure she had experienced. But the more she remembered the night's passion, the more excruciating was the feeling of guilt before her husband. Sarah had avoided going outside during the day. She had barely eaten, had barely slept the night before, lying with her pillow in her arms on the marital bed that now felt like a stranger. She hadn't answered the knocks on the door Emily had come twice to ask if everything was okay, and Sarah had sat quietly, holding her breath, until Emily had left. She hadn't answered Jake's cell phone either. She thought everyone already knew, though her mind knew better. John arrived in the evening. Sarah gathered her strength and met him as if nothing had happened. She threw herself on his neck, trying to hide the nervous trembling that had overcome her. "How I missed you," she whispered, and it was the pure truth. John hugged her tightly and laughed. "And how I missed you. I kept thinking about you." His sincerity only increased her inner torment. Sarah ate almost nothing at dinner, but she smiled and agreed with her husband's stories about the trip. She found herself almost crying because of how good he was and how she could do this to him. Later, when they went to bed, John noticed her detachment. "Sarah, darling, are you sure you're okay? You've been a bit nervous lately. Withdrawn. Maybe it's just me. But if something's wrong, tell me. Please." He looked at her carefully. Sarah felt as if her husband was looking straight into her soul. She felt a surge of panic. Does he know? Or does he guess? "Everything's fine, really," she responded, trying to sound convincing. "Sorry if it seemed that way. It's just that there are so many changes at once. That's why I'm nervous." John nodded thoughtfully, continuing to study her. Then he asked cautiously, "It's not because of me? Maybe work, moving. I thought you wanted this." Sarah shook her head, biting her lip with a painful feeling of guilt. "No, what are you saying? It's not your fault. On the contrary, I'm glad we moved." He sighed with relief and smiled. "Well, okay, I was already starting to worry." He pulled her into his arms, and Sarah leaned against his chest, squeezing her eyes shut. Everything inside her screamed, "Tell him the truth." But she only squeezed her eyes shut. No, she couldn't. She was too afraid of losing him. Later that night, long after John was asleep, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Did he suspect? Unlikely. But would he break if he knew? She couldn't risk it. And behind the wall, in the next bedroom, they weren't sleeping either. Emily was standing by the window, her arms crossed over her chest. "So, maybe you can tell me what's going on?" she asked quietly, without turning around. Jake sat on the bed, holding the shirt he hadn't put on. He was silent, choosing his words. "Jake?" Emily's voice grew cold. "Don't tell me it's nothing." The husband sighed heavily. "I don't know. What are you talking about?" Emily turned and gave him a hard look. "Really? Then why have you barely spoken today?" And you looked at Sarah like a beaten puppy. Jake fell silent, confused. Emily narrowed her eyes. "You're hiding something, and I really hope you're not going to try to make a fool out of me now." He began and stopped. "Please don't get upset." "Don't get worked up," she hissed. "Do you think I can't see? You slept with her?" This directness shocked him. He leaned forward. "No, I mean," he realized that there was no point in denying it. "It happened by accident. I didn't plan it. It all happened that night when you left." Emily closed her eyes and smiled bitterly. "Fantastic. It was worth leaving for a day." "I'm sorry," Jake breathed out, walking up to her. "I don't understand how this happened. It was all very... We were just talking, and then she started crying. I didn't mean to." He trailed off, seeing his wife's eyes flash. "Have you fallen in love with her?" she asked the main question. "No," he answered too quickly. "It's physical, just passion." Emily shook her head. "You know our agreement. No affairs on the side. Entertainment, please, but only together or at least by mutual consent." "I remember," Jake whispered, "and I admit I broke the rule. But you see, it was all spontaneous." The wife hugged herself, her anger beginning to give way to something like curiosity. "And how is she?" Jake was surprised. "What? In bed. Emily said crisply. He looked away. Now, she flared up. Answer. Jake paused, then said quietly. Incredible. Emily bit her lip, her cheeks burning. I see, she said in a slightly more even tone. Okay, that topic is closed. But, she paused. It seems she doesn't know what she wants now. Jake nodded. She is very afraid. For her marriage. Emily looked at him intently. And you? He sighed. I'm most afraid of losing you, to be honest. Emily looked down, softening. I'm not thrilled, of course, but... She chuckled nervously. To be honest, it even turns me on a little. Remember, we started talking about them that night. Jake carefully took her hands. I love you, Em. No one can replace you. She smiled weakly. I know. But from now on, only together, you hear, if she really is that. Emily hesitated. I'm curious too. Jake raised his eyebrows in surprise, but Emily just slapped him on the arm. Just don't think about doing anything without me again, got it? Yes, ma'am, he laughed with relief and pulled her close. But behind his wife's back, Jake looked at the wall toward the Cooper's house. His expression was worried. He knew that for Sarah, things were far from simple, and he was afraid that suspicions would grow into something more. Meanwhile, John drove aimlessly along the deserted highway until it got dark. His heart was breaking with pain and anger. He stopped at a roadside motel only in the early morning, still unable to sleep in a strange, hard bed. The scene at the gate played over and over in his head, Sarah holding her neighbor's hand, their eyes. He shook his head, trying to drive away the intrusive images. In the morning, without breakfast, John headed home to pick up his things and decide what to do next. Day turned to night, night to a new day. Sarah seemed petrified in her grief, sitting for hours. At some point, her gaze fell on their wedding photo on the wall. Shining young faces, he in a formal suit, she in a white lace dress. It seemed like it was in another life. Until death do us part, they promised each other at the altar. Sarah smiled bitterly through her tears, thinking that it was not death that separated them, but she herself. In an empty house, staring at one point. The phone was silent. John did not call. At this time, there was a different conversation going on behind the wall. Jake insisted that he should apologize to John, but Emily dissuaded him. Not now. Let him cool down. Otherwise, he'll kill you when we meet. Jake was tormented by guilt. I'll still try to talk. Maybe write a letter. Emily sighed heavily. She felt sorry for everyone involved, but most of all for Sarah. A plan had formed in her wife's mind. Emily found John driving up to the house that afternoon, frowning darkly. His wedding ring was no longer on the ring finger of his right hand, a sign that spoke for itself. He had been picking up some things while Sarah was out of sight. Emily intercepted him at the car. Can I say a few words? John gave her a dark look. If it's about yours, there's nothing to talk about. Emily raised her hands in a conciliatory gesture. I'm not defending them, or justifying them. It's just, can we talk frankly? Honestly? John chuckled. Sounds funny coming from you. Emily's eye twitched, but she remained calm. Yes, we are guilty, but there are two sides to every story. Listen to me, and then you will decide for yourself what to do. John threw the keys into his pocket and crossed his arms over his chest. Okay? 5 minutes. They stepped aside a little. Emily spoke quietly and seriously. Jake and I have a unusual marriage. We love each other, but we take some liberties together. I thought that maybe you and Sarah would like to experiment someday. We saw that you were interested. She stopped when John's eyes flashed. Get to the point, he said through gritted teeth. Emily nodded. Let's get down to business. I don't know how this happened behind our backs, but I know one thing: Sarah loves you very much. She's a simple girl, not the type to rush into affairs, so there must have been reasons for it. Ah, the reasons, John grinned evilly. I wonder what they are. Emily narrowed her eyes. For example, loneliness. She lacked attention and passion. You yourself admitted that you were constantly at work. Believe me, I see the woman. She was melting from melancholy. John flushed. So it's my fault. I don't blame anyone, Emily said quickly. Just think, maybe if it weren't for Jake, Sarah would still be suffering. And you wouldn't even notice. That's enough, John snapped. Okay, Sarah's unhappy, so what? That's an excuse to have sex with the first guy you meet. Emily winced. Jake is not a stranger. He cared for her, listened to her, and stumbled, just like her. John's eyes flashed angrily. You're all sick. What are you even suggesting? Should I sleep with you now, too, for balance? Emily flushed, but answered unexpectedly calmly. To be honest, the thought did occur to me. John was dumbfounded, and she continued. But that's not the point now. I want to save two families, if you're willing to listen. He remained silent, clenching his jaw. Sarah is understandable and forgivable, Emily said softly. She made a mistake, but she loves you. Is it worth ruining everything because of one incident? She crossed the line, John muttered. Emily tilted her head. Really? The line? That you yourself almost crossed? John looked at her sharply. What are you talking about? She chuckled. Let's remember the pool party a couple of weeks ago, when you helped me carry the plates into the kitchen. John turned pale, but said nothing. Emily continued. Then you, it seems, put your arm around my waist and tried to kiss me. I didn't want to dramatize it. We were drinking. It happens to everyone. But the fact remains, you weren't averse to having fun with me while our people weren't looking. You're lying. John breathed out quietly, but his eyes darted around. Do you want me to swear? Emily snorted. I decided to let it slide then. But now I see that you think you're holier than the Pope. John clenched his fists. What are you trying to achieve? Emily met his gaze firmly. Justice. You are not without sin, John. And Sarah does not know it. He was silent, breathing heavily. You can, of course, destroy your marriage in righteous anger, she summed up. But know this, I can tell the truth too. And if necessary, I'll tell Sarah about that evening. Are you blackmailing me? He narrowed his eyes. Call it whatever you want, Emily sighed. Believe me, I just don't want you both to suffer over a mistake that can be corrected. John closed his eyes, feeling everything turn upside down. Memories of that evening flooded his head. Yes, he was tipsy. Emily seemed damn attractive. He allowed himself too much. He apologized right away. She smiled and laughed it off. He decided that everything was okay, but it turns out that now it will be used against him. And what? Are you suggesting? He asked hoarsely. Talk to Sarah, Emily said softly. Don't rush into things. Give her a chance to make things right. She's already punished herself more than you could. John rubbed his face tiredly. His anger was gone, leaving only pain. I don't know if I can, he admitted honestly. Try it, Emily asked. You love each other, it's obvious. And we'll leave your life if we have to. Just don't do anything stupid. John was silent. Emily touched his hand. I'm really sorry that it turned out this way. With these words, she turned and walked away. John remained standing by the house, immersed in heavy thoughts. He came home that evening. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, huddled. When she saw her husband, she tensed up, as if expecting a blow. John closed the door behind him and sat down silently opposite. For a minute, they just looked at each other. Then John asked quietly, Why? Sarah's lips trembled. I don't know. It's not because I didn't love you. I felt lonely. It's not an excuse, I know. John lowered his head. I let you down. I should have noticed sooner. Sarah blinked in surprise. No, it's my fault. He closed his eyes tiredly. Both are to blame. I wasn't perfect either. Sarah didn't understand what he was getting at, but she didn't ask yet. She stood up slowly and timidly came closer. Can you forgive me? John did not answer for a long time. Then he stood up to meet her. I don't want to lose you, Sarah, but I can't forget this either. Yet. I'll accept everything, she whispered. Any decision you make, as long as you're happy. John looked at her with a mixture of love and pain. Silly. How will I be happy without you? He carefully pulled her to him, and Sarah, sobbing, drowned in his arms. For the first time in a long time, they both felt that perhaps there was still hope. But they had to go through difficult trials ahead to regain the trust that had been lost. Late that evening, John and Sarah, cuddled on the couch, talked for a long time, opening their hearts to each other. For the first time in many years, there were no secrets left between them. Sarah told honestly how loneliness and self-doubt slowly eroded her, how one day intimacy with Jake stirred up long-forgotten feelings in her. Each confession was given to her through tears and pain, but John listened attentively. Without interrupting or judging, he had already poured out all his anger earlier, now only bitterness remained. Then he spoke. He admitted that he himself was not perfect. He drank too much sometimes and flirted with others, trying to feel younger and more alive against the backdrop of routine. He told about the incident with Emily, which almost led to a kiss, and how ashamed he felt afterwards. Sarah, having listened, only smiled sadly through her tears. It turns out that we were both gradually losing each other and looking for consolation in the wrong places. But we found each other again, John said quietly, stroking her hair. They cried and laughed, remembering their younger years, swearing that there would be no more secrets between them. Night found them sitting on the floor, hugging each other among scattered handkerchiefs, but both of their souls felt a little lighter. The burden of lies that had been smoldering between them for many years finally dissolved in the words they confessed. Sarah woke up the next morning feeling exhausted but determined. She served John breakfast in bed, just like she had done long ago, and for the first time saw a warm smile on his face. They even joked a little, though it was awkward for both of them. "Are you sure you want to stay?" John asked suddenly as she was gathering up the tray. "After everything. Maybe you'll be better off without me." Sarah looked at him in surprise and squeezed his hand. "Don't be silly. I want to be only with you. If you can forgive me completely, of course." John nodded, looking down. "I will try my best." He pulled her hesitantly into a kiss. Sarah held her breath. It was their first kiss since the crash. His lips touched hers softly. She responded tenderly. There was no carelessness in the kiss, but there was a promise. They would try again. In the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Jake stood there, tearful and holding a bouquet of snow-white lilies and with a cut on his face. Behind him, at the curb, the engine of a loaded pickup truck was rattling, with a trailer loaded with furniture and boxes. Emily was sitting in the cab of the pickup, deciding to give her husband a chance to apologize to the neighbors in person. Before Sarah could say anything, he held out the flowers. "This is for you. And John, I just wanted to apologize." His voice broke. "I can't forgive myself, I know, but I'm terribly sorry." Sarah was silent, not knowing how to react. She took the flowers mechanically. "I will leave here soon," he continued, looking down. "It'll be better for everyone. But first, I wanted you to know that I sincerely apologize. If you can, forgive me." Then John appeared in the hall. He saw his neighbor, tensed up, but held back. Jake swallowed when he saw him. "John, I have nothing to say except that I was wrong. You are a good man, and I treated you like a pig. If you want to hit me, I deserve it." John's face darkened, but he didn't raise his voice. "I've already done it. I don't see the point anymore. Are you really going to move out?" Jake nodded. "Yes. We talked to Emily, decided to sell the house and move away. It's not out of cowardice, it's just to make things easier for everyone." John smiled wryly. "Simpler. Well, that's probably right." Sarah glanced at her husband. He was tense, but there was no sign of anger in him, rather fatigue and emptiness. "How's Sarah? How is she?" Jake asked quietly, looking at her with concern. "She'll be fine," John snapped, standing next to his wife and putting his arm around her shoulders. Jake understood everything. He lowered his head. Then, "I won't interfere anymore." He turned to leave. Sarah couldn't stand it. "Jake," he turned around, hoping for at least a word of forgiveness. "Take care of yourself," was all she said, squeezing her husband's hand. Jake smiled sadly, his eyes glistening with moisture. He nodded quietly and walked away without looking back again. Sarah closed the door, feeling empty, but also like she had closed an important chapter. John breathed a sigh of relief, as if he had passed a difficult test. He looked at the white lilies in his wife's hands. Beautiful flowers. Shall we put them in a vase? Sarah nodded. For her, the lilies were a symbol of farewell to a mistake, to a painful chapter in their lives. The Millers soon moved in, and a "for sale" sign appeared on the house next door. Life on the quiet street went on as usual. John and Sarah decided not to leave. There was no point in running, the demons were inside, and they had to fight them. They visited a psychologist together for family counseling. These sessions helped them better understand each other's pain and fears. John tried to court his wife again. He made weekends without a phone, took her to the sea for a couple of days. They had once dreamed of this. Sarah's soul was beginning to blossom. She knew they would both be scared, but at least they weren't pretending everything was perfect. They were working on their relationship honestly and openly. A month after the incident, John came home from work early one evening with a bouquet of Sarah's favorite yellow roses. She greeted him with a joyful smile, the first unclouded smile in a long time. They cooked dinner together, chatting and teasing each other. After the meal, they turned on some old jazz that they associated with their early years of marriage. "Shall we dance?" John suddenly suggested, shyly extending his hand to her. Sarah beamed. "Certainly." He put his arm around her waist, and she pressed herself against him. They swayed around the living room to the soft music, and Sarah felt a familiar heat unfold inside her, the same heat she was afraid she would never experience with her husband again. She looked up, meeting John's gaze. His eyes glowed with a warm fire. "You know," he whispered hoarsely, "I think I'm falling in love with you all over again." Sarah smiled and, closing her eyes, kissed him tenderly. The kiss quickly deepened. It lacked the former teenage awkwardness, but the bitterness of betrayal no longer rankled. All that remained was the passion of two people who had nearly lost each other and now wanted to be together again. John picked up his wife and carried her into the bedroom, which was all bathed in the soft light of the night lamp. He lowered her onto the bed and, looking into her eyes, asked in a barely audible voice, "Are you sure? I don't want to push." Sarah responded by pulling him towards her by the shirt. "Darling, I want this more than anything in the world." He froze for a moment, then smiled sincerely, happily. Their lips met again, and this time nothing prevented them from surrendering to their feelings. Sarah pressed her whole body against her husband, feeling his familiar warmth, so close and reliable. John carefully removed her clothes, kissing each newly exposed patch of skin. Sarah closed her eyes, enjoying the gentleness of his touch. She caressed him too, running her fingers over the familiar features of his body, wondering how much she had missed this closeness. When he was inside her, Sarah began to cry quietly, but they were tears of joy. John froze, alarmed, but she whispered through a smile, "Everything is fine. I'm just happy." He understood and touched her tears mixed with laughter with his lips. They loved each other slowly, carefully, as if they were getting to know each other's bodies and souls anew. In moments of ecstasy, their fingers intertwined tightly, as if each promised never to let the other go again. Afterwards, they lay in the darkness, hugging each other as the crickets quietly sang outside the window. Sarah listened to the steady beat of her husband's heart and smiled into the darkness. She felt reborn from the ashes. "I love you," John said quietly, kissing the top of her head. Sarah pressed herself even closer to him. "And I love you too, my love." These words now sounded in a new way. Behind them stood the test of fire, through which they managed to pass. For the first time in a long time, they fell asleep in each other's arms without worries or doubts, confident that a new page awaited them, which they would write together. 6 months have passed. The Miller's house, with its once troubled history and unfinished bathroom, has long since found new owners, a young couple with a toddler. Their yard was always filled with movement, the crackle of a sprinkler, the rhythmic laughter of a toddler, the whinny of a plastic horse on a spring. John and Sarah, relaxing on the porch after work, sometimes heard this childish laughter through the wooden fence. Once these sounds had scratched painfully as a reminder of what they did not have, of dreams that hung in the air but did not become reality. Now this laughter responded in them not with bitterness, but with a quiet, warm sadness and deep gratitude for the fact that everything can still be corrected, reborn, started anew. The house they lived in had changed too. They had repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, thrown out the old curtains, and hung light linen curtains that fluttered in the spring breeze. Sarah called it a rite of exorcism, and John joked that even the shadows in the corners were smiling now. Sarah returned to herself, not the one who lived on autopilot between shopping lists and a tired marriage, but the one who once loved to bake, take photos, write short texts for each rose cake. She started a culinary blog first for herself, then for friends, and after a couple of months, she began to be invited to local fairs and take orders. Her kitchen smelled of cinnamon, vanilla, and hope again. John, seeing her eyes light up, her laughing, brushing flour off her nose, became different himself. He no longer stayed late at work and was less often immersed in his phone screen. He began building a shelf for the nursery long before he knew there would actually be a baby there. He built it just for the future, as he said, with a naive and touching hope. And then it came future. One warm spring evening, they sat on the veranda, wrapped in a thin blanket, watching the sun slowly sink behind the palm trees, painting the sky in shades of honey and garnet. Sarah held the envelope with the ultrasound photo in her hands, slightly wrinkled, but the most precious. Life was being born inside her, small, invisible, but already filling their home with new energy, the breath of something great. When John learned of the pregnancy, he nearly jumped for joy. He cried in embarrassment when he saw the first image on the black and white screen, a speck that was called the baby. Sarah was calm then, but that same night she woke up in the silence and burst into tears too, from relief, from the fact that they had finally reached this moment despite everything. Now, sitting next to her, John stroked her rounded belly, in which one could already feel movement light, like a whisper. "Do you think it's a he or a she?" he asked with a sly smile, leaning closer. "You're still sure it's a boy?" Sarah laughed, tickling his shoulder with the edge of the photo. "I'm sure," he winked. "He'll be a tough kid like Dad. He'll love cars, splashing through puddles. Or be stubborn like Mom," she chuckled. "I love baking and arguing over every little thing." "Then he's doomed. He'll have to become talented and stubborn at once." John picked up and hugged her, pressing himself against her shoulder. They were silent for a moment, letting the world around them just Beth. Leaves rustled. A dog barked somewhere. Jasmine reached into the windows with a thin, sweet aroma. It was an ordinary evening, and in this ordinariness there was something sacred. Then John looked at his wife again, seriously, almost solemnly. "Thank you for not leaving then, for giving us a chance." Sarah looked at him, soft and full of feeling. "Thank you for finding the strength to forgive." He leaned down and kissed the top of her head carefully, as if he was afraid of scaring away everything they had worked so hard to achieve. "We did everything right. Together we are strong." She nodded silently, feeling the confidence in those simple words grow stronger. There was no longer a need to look around, to search for signals, to tense up at every glance. The past had not disappeared, no. It remained with them, but it no longer defined them. It had become the soil from which something new had grown solid, mature, and truly alive. Later, when the sun had set behind the rooftops, they sat on the veranda for a long time, not speaking, just feeling. Sarah rested her head on John's shoulder, and he played with her fingers. It was not a fairy tale ending, but a beginning, the beginning of the most difficult and most real life. Ahead of them were waiting. A nursery, painted a neutral green because they decided not to find out the baby's gender. Sleepless nights and empty bottles. First steps and first Mom and Dad. Perhaps quarrels and fatigue, but without the fear of losing everything. And also Sunday waffle breakfasts, blog posts, John building a playhouse in the garden, and Sarah singing a lullaby without being able to hit the right notes. Life went on, and now it had a taste. vanilla, fried bacon, the hot Arizona wind, and, most importantly, love. The end, and at the same time, the beginning. Thanks for watching till the end. See you soon. Bye, everyone. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.